commercials, let me tell you that I'm super excited about this brown bag. I actually love all of our brown bags, but I'm particularly excited about this one. I am an actual fangirl. I brought this book from home. If you don't know Gene Stratton-Porter, in her day she was a rock star. I have read that popularity-wise, she is actually equivalent in our day to J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter. So she was quite something, just a really amazing person in her own right, in addition to her popularity as an author. I bought this book at her house museum, which is an easy drive away from here. And I had no idea that Barbara wrote this until last year when she was here. So I am just super excited. I'm going to ask her to sign my book later. And I know she has some copies that you guys can do that too. So you may remember Barb was here last year for a brown bag, which was also very well attended. And Iris was telling me today it's one of the most popular ones on our YouTube channel. So if you missed it, I know you're going to love today, and you can check out last time as well. Barb is the author of 7 books. She's a former journalist, Pulitzer Prize finalist, and I would love to have you help me welcome her, Barbara Olenyik Morrow.
Well, all right, and I'll just say, I hope nobody has to go through Warsaw anytime soon, because coming here today, I came from over by Auburn, way east of here, the traffic light is out, the main one downtown, which then backs everybody up on traffic lights, and you have to, one after one after one, the cars have to stop. So allow yourself a little more time. Okay, we are here to talk about this lady. Can everybody see her, the screen okay? Yep. Let's hope that we can go. Here's a picture of her in adulthood. Her story starts when this man is president. Okay, and specifically, it's at a time when our nation is at war, and it happens when bodies had just recently littered the battlefield at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So you're probably able to zoom in on the fact that 6 weeks later, after the death and dying at Gettysburg, Gene entered the world on August 17, 1863. And she's born near the village of LaGrow, Indiana. LaGrow is right up there. Wabash is right there. Can you see that? Okay, it's a little village. And she's born on a farm called Hopewell. And later in her life, she would say, no other farm was ever quite so lovely. She was the youngest of 12 children, okay? And as a child, she roamed the woods and fields and pastures. She played alongside streams. She made pets of baby squirrels and rabbits and fed sweetened water to butterflies. She delighted in everything wild. Now, every one of those photos I've just shown you were taken by her. Not as a child, of course, but this is, she was just mesmerized with nature and the outdoors, and we're going to learn about in her adulthood, but these were all her photos. This is her mother, Mary Stratton. Gene and others said that Mary had flower magic in her fingers. She could make anything grow. And from her mother, Gene learned to love native plants. She'd be out around the farm with her mother, and the cows or the horses or farm animals would be trampling on wildflowers. Gene, her mother showed her how you could dig them up by the roots and transplant them over to fence corners. And as Gene said then, and again, these are her photos, this was how I got my first lesson in conservation. Okay, we don't have to destroy nature. It can be preserved. This is her father, Mark Stratton. He's a farmer and a lay minister. On their large farm, he donated some land in a corner, helped people build a Methodist church, and he would preach there. From her father, Gene learned to love birds. Again, her photos. Now, one year, quickly, her father realized that she was, entranced by the birds. And he said, of course you love them because they add beauty to the world with their colorful plumes and with their bird song. But he said also they play a role in the balance of nature because the fruit and other trees around the farm, the birds eat the insects. And he said, and that's good for us as a farmer. So one year, and when she's still a young girl, he said, Jean, I put you in charge of all the birds nesting on our property. So she said one spring she would daily go to 64 nests around the farm, check them out, and she would watch the eggs. There'd be the eggs and the babies that they would hatch, and she would watch what the mothers fed the young. And in her apron pockets, if they needed meat, there'd be some worms she'd leave in the nest. If they were grain, she would provide bits of grain that she got from the kitchen table. So, but she also would chase away cats and snakes from the bird nest. And again, when the young hatched, she fed them with bits of food from her apron pockets. Her mother called her a little bird woman. And people in the neighborhood would bring her their wounded birds, and she would try to nurse them back to health. Now, all was going well for Jean up until about the time she was about 9 or 10. But soon her life would be upended. She's had this freedom just to run outdoors, do what she wanted. Her mother was ill. Her mother contracted typhoid fever, which means she was bedridden. But there were lots of older sisters. They could do the housework and chores. The boys are out in the fields with the father. So Jean is just this little girl. She's kind of free to do what she wants, and she loves that. She can just explore in the creeks, fields, whatever. But around this time, one of the older sisters is killed in a railway accident, and her beloved brother Laddie drowns in the Wabash River. And this was devastating for the family because Laddie was the one son who he did farming, he intended to remain a farmer. And so the father, Mark, who's quite up there in age, he was in his 50s when Jean was born. So, he's way getting up there. He wants to retire. But now Laddie is gone, and he's not going to be able to take over the farm. Jean also loved Laddie because she loved to just run through the woods and fields. Laddie was there to look after her, talk to her. They had a kinship. So what happens when around the age of 10? Well, when she's 11, that summer, the family is going to leave the farm. The father's going to lease it. He's too old. And he decides they need to move to Wabash. So just go from LeGros, just downriver, I guess that would be, to the town of Wabash. He wants to go for a couple of reasons. As I said, his wife has remained ill. He thinks she's old now, better get to a town where there's a little bit more medical care. There is a married daughter who lives there, and so they probably ought to get close to family. Well, Jean isn't having anything of it. She loves where she is, the wildflowers, the birds, and she stomps her feet. She says, I'm not going. And of course, she's still a young girl. The family argues with her. Finally, her father consents. She may take 9 birds with her into town. So she has some caged birds. They go with her into town, hoping that that'll make life more bearable. Okay, well, Wabash is problematic for one reason. Within months, 4 months of moving, mother dies. Okay, so Jean has lost a sister, a brother, and now a mother in a very short period of time. And she's been ripped from what she loves, the farm. Now, compounding her misery, Wabash, in Jean's opinion, was dirty, noisy, and foul-smelling. Railroads ran through the town. There had been canals going through. Now it's a railroad town. And, you know, there's soot everywhere. It darkens the county courthouse. And as I've already indicated, she missed fresh country air, native flowers, wild creatures. And in Wabash, she now is expected to attend school 8 months a year. And oh boy, that's trouble. Okay, that doesn't mean she's been uneducated. She's been going to a township school. But of course, back in those days, because this was a farm family, farm community, you went to school in the winter, and then spring, everybody's doing spring planting, so school is very erratic. Okay, summer, maybe you pick it up a little bit, but you don't go in the fall because that's harvesting season. So she's just been getting a little bit of township schooling. Well, and it turns out in town now, her brother is the school superintendent, one of the brothers. So, you know, she has to be there. Now, again, she has been schooled at home. Her father, the lay minister, he would read nightly from the Bible, and reportedly he had this real stentorian voice, and so it was kind of captivating to listen to him read. And he had his own home library, so she heard the work of Shakespeare, British writers, British history. So she was being schooled in that sense. But when it came to the classroom, it might be kind of hard to read here, she enjoyed writing stories. She'd sit behind her books in the classroom and wouldn't be reading or doing other things. She'd be writing her own stories. But if she didn't apply herself to subjects like math, you know, she failed. She hated how teachers never, in her words, made the slightest effort to discover what I cared for personally, what I had been born to do. She thought, you know, they need to find out, how do I want to approach learning? And their only goal, as Jean saw, was to push her into a groove into which all the other students ran. And again, you're picking up here, she's somebody who thinks for herself, very independent-minded. She's going to live life on her own terms. When I give talks in schools, I don't play this point up a lot. She dropped out of Wabash High School just in her senior year, just months short of graduation. Okay, she could have done it easily, but another sister had cancer. She was mad at her dad because he had made her get rid of her pet birds. You know, her life was kind of in a fit. She quit. She claimed throughout her life to have had no regrets. Quote, I studied harder after leaving school than I ever did before, and in a manner that did me real good. Okay, so again, you know, she's very independent. Here's a picture of her at age 16. And again, now in her high school years, this is a rough time for her a little bit. The family never had much money, and one thing that bothered her, the other girls in Wabash had prettier dresses, had ribbons in their hair, got to go on vacations. You know, she felt a little bit like a country bumpkin. During this time, there were a couple of high points, and one was in the summer, starting when she's in her teens, and then it would pick up on other occasions. She lives here in Wabash. Take your eye up to that dot up north, Rome City. Okay, on Rome City, in the 1880s, Jean would vacation there, the first time she goes with her sisters, at Sylvan Lake. And at Sylvan Lake, on this island there, they hosted annual Chautauquas. Have you heard of that before? Chautauquas it developed out of upstate New York, Lake Chautauqua. And it became then a movement that moved across the Middle West. And people would go there for entertainment, music, singing, could take art lessons, a lot of enrichment, instruction, and also Bible study, Sunday school. Okay, so it was considered very wholesome, and you could go there and you could learn things. It was a way of kind of bringing art and culture out to the Middle West, the Chautauqua movement. So Jean would go there and, with her sisters, that's the first time she went. And she would go back. She loved Sylvan Lake, not so much because what was offered there, but because it offered an escape from town and city life. She was back among wild birds, breathing fresh air, and enjoying walks in the woods. She spent lazy days fishing for black bass and paddling along the shore to gather water lilies. So she's in her element because she can be outdoors there. Okay. I love this, one of her quotes. Other vacationing young women are there. And it's kind of a, boys meet girls type of thing. In that era, we're in the Victorian era, these young women had been reared to embroider, paint, or daintily fan themselves on front porches. Jean wasn't having any of that. Here's what I love. I was considered an outcast and half demented because I fished in the rain one night when I might have attended a ball. One woman blasted me with scorn because I had the hardihood to offer her a Timothy straw strung with luscious wild raspberries. Jean has found this, put it together. She thinks it's a great offering. And, the woman says thanks, but no thanks. So this is what Jean loved to do when she was up there. So she is there when she's 20 years old. She's on the verge that summer of turning 21. And while she's there doing her own thing, there's a gentleman there who takes note of her. Okay, and his name is Charles Darwin Porter. Now, he is 13 years older than her. Okay, I've not been able to find any picture of Charles, who at that point would have been 34. So I'm going to show you Charles. And when I do this in schools, the kids go, ah! because when he saw her at 20, he was only 34 then. He was not at this age. This is Charles, much later in his life. Charles was a druggist in the good sense of the term. He had a drugstore in Geneva, Indiana, and he'll soon have another one in Fort Wayne. All right, well, again, Victorian era, he just doesn't go right up to her and introduce himself. He just didn't do that. He has to kind of make inquiries of who's she related to, and get names, and he finds out her name and address. But again, he does not approach her there at Sylvan Lake. What he will do is a couple months later, when he's back at his home and she's back in Wabash, he will write a letter introducing himself. And he'll say, am I being too bold or might we correspond? She says, sure, why not? You're a stranger, but I'll talk to you. So a courtship, letter writing ensues, as did a courtship. And we have in the letters, to me, I love this. Again, Jean, she's not trying to hide anything. In one of her letters, she says, I think differently from most people, so be prepared to be shocked. Okay? so prepare to be shocked. She also was upfront to him in these letters about her likes and dislikes. Charles, I made some cookies and they were not fit to eat. And I don't like housekeeping by any means, but if I have to do it, I mean to march it through. So, if he's looking for a true homemaker, she's going to tell him, here's the score, okay? Well, Charles, he must have been smitten because he does propose, and they are married in April of 1886 in her home in Wabash. They settle in Decatur, where Charles had grown up. So, okay, here we have Wabash. Almost take your finger straight across Decatur, over there by the Ohio line in Adams County. Okay? Now, Charles buys the family homestead back, and he thinks this is a good place for her. He has a drugstore, as I said, here in Geneva, and then another one up in Fort Wayne. Allen County, where the three rivers come together, that's Fort Wayne. He can take an interurban train back and forth to get to their home in Geneva. But Gene doesn't like this for a couple things. Charles is gone all the time. You know, he's taking the train back and forth. And Decatur to her is just like Wabash. Smelly, crowded, you know, she's not outdoors. So she's not all that enamored of it. So she hears about, she's got time on her hands to read, she hears about the discovery of gold in the Dakotas. Okay, people are striking it rich out there. She's lonely and she's restless for adventure, so she said, Charles, let's move out there. And remember now, he's in his late 30s. He's not having that. You know, he's an established businessman. That doesn't appeal to him. And so it resolves itself quite quickly. They have a baby, okay? And they have one child only. She's born a little over a year after they're married. Okay, now, Jean was quite a gifted artist. This is not Charles, that's her father. Jean drew her father, and that is the little girl, Jeanette. Okay. Now, Jean, who's miserable with this baby in Decatur, Charles is off at work, she finally convinces him to move down here, where one of his businesses, to Geneva, okay, right on the Adams-J County line. And she likes it. They move into a little yellow house, she says, but it has some land. She can have trees. She can plant flowers. You know, she can sit outside and listen to the birds. This is okay for her. She's content. This is downtown Geneva. It's just a tiny little place. Now, Charles, he's a good businessman, along with operating a drugstore there, as well as in Fort Wayne. He soon opened a bank in Geneva. There had not been a bank there. He also owned acres of Adams County farmland, earning him a steady income from 60 oil wells that drilled on his property. Okay, so he's finally kind of acquiring things. He's getting a little bit of money. He's very thrifty, but he believes now he at last had enough money to take Jean on a vacation. And so they will travel to Chicago in 1893 to the World's Columbian Exposition. You may be aware that this is when Chicago was the Great White City. Have any of you read that book, Devil in the White City? This is the expositions that they're talking about. And so there's white buildings everywhere. There are lagoons, fountains. You know, it's supposed to be magnificent. It's something I would love to see. But Jean, she loves it all, but there's one building that really catches her imagination. It's the Forestry Building. And this is a huge building. The colonnades all on the outside are these massive tree trunks, logs, brought from every state in the nation to showcase all the different type of trees we have in the country, okay? So this colonnaded all around, inside, wood, wood, wood. She just loves it. She thinks, man, this is awesome. So when they get back home, Jean says, you know, this little yellow house, Charles, that we're living in, we need something bigger. So he agrees, you know, says, okay, we got a little bit of money now. And she gets with an architect, and she designs a home for them. And what she designs is the Limberlost Cabin. Today it's a state historic site in Geneva. I encourage you to go see it. It's beautiful. But it's a spacious, she calls it a cabin, but it's a spacious home. 2-story that she helped design, and it's wood inside and out. Wisconsin cedar logs form the first floor. Red cedar shingles on top. There's all kinds of oak, white and red oak inside, mahogany furniture, wood, 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 but beautifully done. And she loves it. And what she also designs and loves is she builds a greenhouse, a conservatory on one end of her cabin. And she arranges the windows so that wild birds can come in and out. Okay, so she can enjoy the birds on her property, and she plants a lot of trees and things, fruit trees, but she loves to have them come right into her house. Now, right around this time, they took this, Jean and Charles took this nice vacation. They built this big house. It was the biggest, fanciest house in Geneva. But now Charles, he's worried that maybe he's overextended himself financially. Jean, as is the case with many women in that era, she's dependent on her husband for money. Okay? Anytime she needs something, she has to go to Charles. And growing up, she was always having to ask her father for money. There was just, she hated just not ever having a whole lot. And she just thinks, I don't really want to live this way of being beholden to somebody else financially. So she says, you know what? I took up my pen. I'm going to see if I can earn some money on my own. So she does. She writes an article for a outdoor magazine, Recreation, and of course, she knows what she wants to write about. She's going to write about wild bird life. She thinks, I have things I can say about this. So she does, and she sends it to the editor, but there's a problem. The editors wanted the piece illustrated, and they planned to use drawings of mounted birds stuffed and wired. Those pictures repelled me. I was horrified, Jean said. And she says to the editor, you're not going to illustrate my article on bird life with these stuffed bird pictures. It's not going to happen. And so she and the editor went back and forth, and finally she said, well, fine, don't run the article then. And, it didn't happen. Now, she knows she's really confronted with a problem because she wants to write. But this is the way that articles and things were illustrated, with stuffed birds. More specifically, they were dead birds. This guy, John James Audubon. He was famous in the early 1900s for painting lifelike images of North American birds in their natural surroundings, and they are gorgeous. His photos, the birds almost seem lifelike. But in order to paint those birds, they had to be killed or seriously wounded so he could put them up, in front of his easel and paint them. And Jean just said, this is disgusting. That is bloody work. And that's not what we're not here to do to birds. We're going to tell their story, but we're not going to kill them in order to illustrate what they look like. So she's got a problem, and she knows it. Well, the problem will soon resolve itself in an interesting way because, as we've said, she has birds in her house, and there's a parrot, Major, the family parrot. He's sitting there on Jeanette's shoulder. Jean drew this picture, too. Again, she was quite an artist. Well, one evening, let me see if we got this here. Oh, I'm going too fast. Okay, they're at the table one evening. They let the parrot eat at the table with them. And Major, the parrot, dips his beak into, they're having oyster stew, and grabs an oyster out. And Jean just kind of starts laughing, squealing, and she says, oh, I wish I had a picture of that. She was so amused by it. Well, Jeanette, the daughter, talks to Charles and says, Dad, Father, here's what we can do. They will give Jean a camera. Christmas 1899. She'll get a camera as a Christmas present. Now, for her, this is a newfangled contraption. She really doesn't know how to make it, work, what to do. But she will practice because she thinks, aha, I think I can do something with this. Because what is her goal? It is to get a correct reproduction of a living bird, not a stuffed bird, and to photograph birds in their natural habitat. Okay, so practice, well, that's winter. She'll go around to all the windows, through the windowsills, take pictures of birds through the windowsills. She's got birds in her house. She'll take pictures of those. She's got her flowers in her conservatory. She'll take the pictures of native plants. She'll even take pictures of the fish in the aquarium. Okay, because she's teaching herself, how do I make this camera work? Because as her pictures are coming out, she knows they're not very good. They're very streaky, because I'm going to tell you more about how she's going to be developing herself. But she does practice, and she gets better at it. And then by spring, by summer, she says, I'm ready to go outdoors and really see what I can do. So where should she go? Well, not far from her home, less than a mile away, was a vast wilderness of streams, marshlands, narrow lakes, and unbroken forests. It was a treacherous swamp, she said. It was known as the Limberlost. Okay, one of the few places is kind of primeval wilderness in the United States at that point. And it's right by her. And again, these are her photos. She'll take of it. Now, from May until June, the Limberlost resembled a jungle, oozing with muck, infested with poisonous snakes, abuzz with swarming mosquitoes, and nearly impenetrable due to towering trees, tangled underbrush, and high, stiff grass. All right? But it was also filled with birds. She could see the birds above the treetops, and she thought, I've got to get in there. This is where I have to go, because I know that there's great bird life, within it. So she goes, she puts on her hip waders, she gets a pistol for the snakes, puts on a hat with mosquito net, take her camera, 40 pounds, and she ventures into it. She goes back and she goes back. Charles is not happy. He forbids her to go. She's not going to listen to him. She goes back and she goes back. Okay, even that eventually she's getting so much gear, the neighbors would see her going down the farm roads, and they'll think, look at that woman going into that, because nobody's venturing in there. It's impenetrable. But she's going to do it. She gets to the point, too, her equipment gets so heavy. We'll talk about that. She'll hire a boy or two to help her, because then she's going to take cameras in and ropes, and, it's a real production. Well, Charles, as I said, he does not want her going in there, so try to kind of pull her off the swamp. He says, you want pictures of birds? I'm a fisherman. I'm going to show you birds along the Wabash River. So, again, these are her pictures. Oh, and there's one coming up here. He loved to fish, so he showed her bird life along the Wabash and other waterways. Okay, and that was a good deal, because she got a lot of good pictures that way, too. And there, Jean continued her bird studies and her photography. And again, people had never seen this before. People had never seen this. Birds in the wild. These were, living, breathing pictures. Nesting. And this, I put this in, it's in one of her books. This bird was building its nest, and it obviously accidentally hung itself. Okay? But she writes about this. She tells about the bathing, the brooding habits, the feeding habits, the mating habits, about birds. She also aimed her camera at wildlife, okay? She couldn't pass up all these fantastic flowers. So again, these are her flowers too, her pictures. Jeanette often joined her in woods and fields. Now, let's talk about these cameras. Okay, by the late 1800s, there is the Eastman Kodak camera. And probably everybody in this room maybe is a little bit of my age that can remember you had the little rolls of film, and you put them in the camera, and you snapped your picture. Well, Eastman came up with this idea, and they would ship you the camera and the film. You would take your pictures, and then without you doing anything, you would just ship it back to the Eastman Kodak company. They would develop your film. They'd send you your pictures. they'd also send your camera back with a fresh roll of film in it, okay? That's how it worked. It was how photography for the mass market developed. But Jean, of course, she didn't really like that. Despite the popularity of the Kodak, Jean preferred, as did many professional photographers, to take photographs with glass plates 8 by 10 inches in size. So, okay. She believed the plates gave her sharper, more detailed pictures. So this is an example, these field view cameras. Okay, they kind of stretched out up there, and then you'd have your little case that you would carry your glass plates in, so that you get a sense of the size. This is what she had to lug around with her in the swamp. And that's why she then had to get wagons and people to help her. On her field trips, she always took along 2 to 3 dozen plates and often a wagon load of equipment, including 4 cameras for different types of outdoor work. The equipment weighed as much as 100 pounds. To complicate matters, the glass plates had to be changed after every picture was taken. Now also, she would go out early in the morning, and she had learned this from the time she was a child. You go in and you're making a lot of noise, rustling, and then the birds all scatter. So she learned she would just have to plant herself, sit, stand, kneel, whatever, until everything got quiet again. And then the birds wouldn't be afraid, and they would come back and resume doing what they did in the wild. And that's then what she would do. She would let them settle. Also, she wanted to get the pictures up high, so then she put ladders up against trees. She would string a rope between the 2 trees and put her camera, and then I guess on the ground here she could do the little click of the bulb to have the picture too. But she would have to be outdoors all day to get maybe just a few pictures, because she had to let the birds settle down and resume their normal lifestyle. You read her books and you're just kind of exhausted thinking about what she went through. Now the cameras, meanwhile, were costly. To pay for one, Jean sold some of the family jewelry. And here's an example of her then, and she's in her khaki. It looks like she's carrying a satchel there, a butterfly net. She had a pistol that she took with her. Back home in her cabin, Jean lacked a proper dark room in which to develop her pictures. She improvised in her bathroom, stuffing rugs under the cracks of doors and pulling the window shutters tight to block out all light. Okay, so this is her own way to do this. She also improvised in the kitchen, using her sink to wash the exposed plates, the negatives, and the prints. She dried them on meat and turkey platters. Now, I came across something in doing my research that said Charles ate downtown Geneva just about every night. That doesn't surprise me. if she's been in the field all day and she's got this going on. And here's a picture of Jeanette and a friend in their home. You see this stuffed, cranes? What do you think that is? I'm not sure. Okay, what was life inside there? Oh my goodness. 300 to 600 bulbs bloomed every winter in her conservatory. Newly emerged moths and butterflies flew through the house, feeding on saucers in the conservatory and from saucers of honey and sweetened water, feeding on flowers. Patches of moth eggs, protected by glasses turned upside down, sat on rugs. Wounded birds perched on furniture. Neighbors kept bringing her their birds. Can you help? This bird has a broken wing. Caterpillars filled boxes, and guinea pigs at one point occupied the kitchen. That's why Charles ate downtown. And cocoons could usually be found pinned to lace curtains. Okay, it's a menagerie. Now, she's been writing articles for magazines, outdoor magazines, recreation, and having success. They're using her photos. But now she decides, let's try my hand at something else. So she writes her first book. It's about 2 cardinals, lovebirds, There is a farmer in it, but it focuses on the birds. It's published in 1903 by Bob's Merrill, Indianapolis Publishing House. It was quite famous at the time. Okay, that book doesn't do so well, and doesn't get it. It's kind of lukewarm, the reviewers. Her second book, a year later, is a novel, and it's Freckles. Okay, and this time she creates a boy, a fictional boy, puts him in the Limberlost. She said, I know what I can write about. I'm in this Limberlost all the time. I'm going to let people experience it as I do. So she creates this orphan boy as one arm. And she puts herself in the story too. There's a bird woman, okay, that Freckles will interact with. This novel, it doesn't do that great either in terms of sales. Okay, she's kind of disappointed. So now she's going to go with a nonfiction book. And this is what I have done with birds. So now she gets to tell the story of all of her field notes, her adventures working with birds, how she works with them. And it's filled with all kinds of photographs that she's taken. And she just loves this book. This is nonfiction. This is her element. And she thinks everybody's going to love this book. But it doesn't do so well either. Then she hits on an idea. She says, I got it. I know what'll be a bestseller, a blockbuster. It's going to be Birds of the Bible. Now, she's been spending years as she reads the Bible. Anytime there's a reference to a bird, she's been writing it down on a legal pad. Bird. I can find that bird. So then she makes a point of going, finding that bird and taking a picture of it, okay? So she's got this whole list of birds that are in the Bible. She's got photographs of them all. She, in her mind, every Sunday school class in America is going to want this book. Okay, she thinks this is a surefire bestseller. But not so much, okay? It doesn't do... She goes to great lengths to make the cover to look like it's the bark of a tree, to the bird there popping its head out. So, she's really, she can't believe it. But that year she also will write another novel, okay? And that novel is A Girl of the Limberlost. And all of a sudden, bingo, this hits the jackpot. Okay, people are just drawn into this. We're back in the Limberlost again, just as Freckles had been. But this time there's a girl, Elnora, and there's a real romance in there. The bird woman is still in there. But this one, it just captivates people. Okay, so 1909, she strikes it. Now, eventually, her fiction and nonfiction books would sell at a rate of nearly 1,700 copies a day. Her readership at its peak would climb to an estimated 50 million people. I wish I could say that. Earnings from her literary activities would reach an estimated $2 million. And again, this would be in the, basically the 19-teens, And, this, of course, is great because she was always determined she would make her own way financially in the world, and she certainly does. Between 1895 and 1945, only 55 books racked up American sales of 1 million or more copies. She wrote 5 of them. 5 of the 55 had her name. And she even outdistanced such heralded names as Mark Twain and Rudyard Kipling. So what are her top 5? Well, Freckles, A Girl of the Limberlost, The Harvester, Laddie, her brother, and Michael O'Halloran. Now, you say, well, wait, Freckles didn't do that well all at once. Well, it's true. But once A Girl of the Limberlost hit it big, then they went back and they started reprinting. And paperback copies were reprinted. And where she became enormously popular was during World War I. Because they shipped paperback copies, the troops had those over in France, and while they're sitting in those trenches, amid all the death and dying and destruction that's going on around them, American soldiers are reading Freckles, A Girl of Lumberlost, and they're being transported back to America, to the woodlands, to the farms, to nature, things that they loved back home. And so these were amazingly popular in the 19-teens. Okay, Jean's passion for wildlife included moths and butterflies. Okay, so we can't leave out what she also was good at. She often collected cocoons in the woods, brought them home, and hung them among the flowers in her conservatory. Eventually, she began raising her own specimens to better study them. She even turned her bedroom, that's true, into a hatchery and pinned cocoons close to her pillow at night. She did not want to miss being awakened by the scraping of feet when the moths finally emerged. And she would hear this, hop up, get her camera, and start taking pictures. Because I didn't know this, moths do not live that long. They might just live a day or a few days. Moths have a short lifespan, so she wanted to capture it all. And do not ask me where Charles was sleeping. I do not know while this was going on. Okay. Yeah. So these two, these now they have died, but she's caught pictures of them and she kind of spreads them out so people can see what they look like. And here's her, in her home in Geneva, you can see her moth collection. In 1912, color film had not yet been commercially produced. Photographs were black and white or tinted brown. To help her readers appreciate the delicate shading of moth wings and to aid collectors in identifying specimens, Jean painted her prints using watercolors. So she would even go to Indianapolis, get special paints, get special brushes so that she could paint her. And you can see how beautifully it's done. And she's looking at the real thing and she's coloring it so we can know what they really look like. Now, she became so obsessed with this project, which she's going to turn into a book. By then, her daughter, Jeanette, is grown, comes back to Geneva, visits her mother, and Jeanette writes that her mother, again, was so obsessed, upstairs, painting, would not stop to eat. So Jeanette said, I would take spoonfuls, forkfuls of food and feed my mother while she's painting. She was driven to get the project done, and she would turn it into a book. Now, the first decade of the 20th century, we know this guy is president, okay, and he's what we kind of view as our first environmental president because he was all about creating wildlife preserves, preserving our forests, creating national parks. Well, at that time, in that first decade, while he's lobbying for that, and well, certainly that's where Jean's heart is, it's also a time we've seen in the late 1800s great industrialization taking place, and even more is going to take place as we get into the 1900s. And so the Limberlost, which had served as her field laboratory, by then the loggers are coming in, they see all that timber in there, and they start taking out the timber, okay, for furniture, ship mast. And when they get the timber out, then the oil drillers can go in to try to tap the ground to get oil out. And then the farmers are in there to start putting in the ditches to start getting the water out so that they can plant on it. So her Limberlost is being destroyed, okay? Now, I always think a bit of this irony is Charles owns farmland, but he's also drilling on it too. So, I mean, how the family got their money is from the drilling. Jean doesn't really talk about that so much, but she is upset that the Limberlost is being destroyed. So she has to look, she says, I need a new laboratory, a new place to go. So she starts driving around northeast Indiana, and she's looking for land that she herself is already a preserve, or she can turn it into a preserve. and she finds what she wants on the shores of Sylvan Lake. So where she had gone as a young girl up to Rome City, lo and behold, she's going to circle back there. She will go back to Sylvan Lake, and she'll find some land. And she, in 1913, she will hire workers to begin building yet another home, bigger, more modern. It'll have a dark room where she can develop. She won't have to use the family bathroom. Fabulous kitchen, and it's literally a gorgeous home. Have some of you been there? Okay, it's open now for the spring. Time to go. So yeah, she will work up there, and it's called now her cabin at Wildflower Woods. It's completed in February of 1914. And now that as it's being built, she has all these grounds there, and she's determined to do her bit for the environment. So she will, this is an Auburn automobile. I'm from Auburn, where they made this. She will put sacking on the sides, over the top, over the back, heaped up there, and she will drive around Northeast Indiana, finding plants that she knows are in danger. You know, the animals are going to get them, trample on them, or they're going to start dredging in this area, and you know, these plants will be destroyed. So she's going to try to find one of every that she thinks are so important of native plants. And she's going to bring them to her property. And eventually, more than 17,000 trees, vines, shrubs, and wildflowers were planted at Wildflower Woods, most of them tucked into the soil by her. Wow. She was strong, and she was hardworking. I mean, you read what she did. You know, she was all about getting her hands dirty and lifting, pulling, doing all this herself. And it's beautiful there. So and especially in the spring, I encourage you to take a field trip. Now, in 1917, the United States went to war. We joined the war against Germany. Jean continued writing books and bringing more plants to her property, but she was growing restless. She also caught the Spanish flu that was sweeping the country by 1919. Okay, so she's not feeling so great. So in 1919, she decides, I need to go out where there's more sunshine. She goes out, she has a brother out there, she likes it, and she decides, I'm going to move. So she does. And she gets out there, and it's a whole new world to her. So she's not in forests or in fields and swamps anymore. Now there's native scenery, but it's so different. Canyons and mountains. She loves the ocean. She's always a fisherwoman. She enjoys, now she can really fish. And she loved the glorious sunshine, enabling her to work outdoors year-round. Okay, because you know in Indiana you can't be out there. Now she can be outdoors all the time. Charles remained with his business in Indiana, though he did come for visits. It's worth noting, too, that when she built Wildflower Woods on Sylvan Lake, that was just her home. She built a bedroom for him, and he could come up on weekends if he chose. They never divorced, and I guess you could say they were a bit estranged. I mean, but they kept it very simple. But that house was hers, and her money was her own money. Okay, and she built some things out in California too. We can talk about. Okay, now, as never before, Jean began socializing in California. Her acquaintances included actors, musicians, sculptors, and poets. So she started to kind of get, she knows how everybody knew her in Indiana as this outdoors woman. She still does that, but she's kind of grooving on this California scene. She spiced up her wardrobe. I have laid aside boots and breeches and put on crepe and beaded chiffon. Okay, so she's taking the ladylike look. She also turned to movie making, becoming one of Hollywood's first female producers. In some ways, this isn't surprising. She knows how to use a camera. You know, she's taught herself that. And in the late teens, Hollywood is turning into movie-making capital. You know, they had been doing it in New York and some other places, but the movie-making sets up in Hollywood because they're sun year-round, so they can film on the sets. And she thinks, I'm going to get into this act too. Paramount had made one of her movies, I think it's Freckles, and she did not like what they did. She said they twisted the story. You know, they took out the stuff that I was important. So that kind of put it into her head. I can do, as she always said, I'd rather do it myself. Okay, so she's going to teach herself the movie making business. And she does. And I don't know if you recognize that woman behind her. That is her daughter, Jeanette. Jeanette will come out west with her. And this guy, so here's Jean, here's Jeanette, and this gentleman, he'll be her director, James Meehan, and then he and Jeanette will get married in 1923. Okay, so it'll become a family operation. Her first film, Jean, that she will have written, it premiered in Los Angeles in 1923, based on her book, Michael O'Halloran. These are all based on her books. Then A Girl of the Limberlost will be released in 24, and then other films will follow. Meanwhile, Jean continued writing novels with settings that describe California's landscape and plant life. So, you know, no more swamps in Indiana, a whole new setting. She also wrote a novel, The Keeper of the Bees, dedicated to her daughter, Gene Stratton-Monroe. That 11-year-old granddaughter later had a part in the movie. That's her little granddaughter. In California, Jean also began writing poetry, as well as monthly articles for McCall's magazine, where she had her own page. Readers loved her columns. And of course, she continued to urge readers to promote the environment and preserve wildlife. She even lobbied to save the starving elk of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Meanwhile, too, Jean made plans to build 2 more homes. She's already built 2. She's good at this. She'll build a summer workshop on Catalina Island off the coast of Los Angeles. And, well, there it is there. Wrigley, of chewing gum fame, has a mansion up there, too. It's still there today. And she will also build a 22-room mansion atop a small mountain outside Los Angeles, an area today known as Bel Air. Okay, so imagine you see there's hardly, not much around it. Okay, this is early 20s, you know, that part of LA. I think I've got it right. Oh, well. A few years ago, well, a number of years ago, I was working on a book on John Wooden, UCLA coach, so I was out there doing some research. My husband was with me, and I had the address of this house, and I heard had been auctioned off with stuff in it. And I said, oh, let's go try to find it, Doug. Well, we did, and clearly it was being set for demolition. There was a big fence all around it, you know, you could see up the hill, windows boarded up. So, okay, I'm making a confession here. There was a little opening, so we did go inside and walk around. And you couldn't go in the house, but the swimming pool was there with the mosaics and just things that she had described in her writing. Clearly, it had been an amazing home, but I'm since told it's not there anymore. So the ground on which it sat, they've probably built 2 or 3 other mansions, because everything was built up around it, and it was quite pricey. You know. So anyhow, that was her mansion. She even instructed the architect to make sure the height of the house did not force birds to change their migration course. And again, this is another angle that when my husband and I were there, this was all gone. You know, this was kind of just open. On December 6, 1924, within weeks of when she was to move into her new home, she was killed in a car accident in Los Angeles. Tributes poured in from all over. She was 61 years old. That's a lot she accomplished in 61 years. One of her last wishes, as expressed in an article she wrote, was to be buried where she had most enjoyed life, in the wild. In 1999, her remains were moved from California and buried at Wildflower Woods, now a state historic site, just as the other one down in Geneva is. And what about the Limberlost, that watery and forested region that served to launch her writing career? Well, thanks to some conservationists, people who love nature, they got together in the 1990s, two conservation groups, and they began buying up land, allowing it to return to its natural state. And so it's beautiful. The Limberlost will never be what it was because that was primeval. But we do have wildlife that's back there, bald eagle, frogs are back, birds, turtles, beautiful flowers, her butterflies. On March 21, 2023, the Indiana Natural Resources Commission approved the dedication of Limberlost Swamp Nature Preserve. The new preserve consists of 719 acres of land that stretches across Adams and Jay counties and includes more than 3 miles of walking trails. It is Indiana's 298th nature preserve. Jean once said, "I live in a world of light, fragrance, beauty, and song. No wonder it overflows in my book." Thank you for your time today.